Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself. Feeling ready to kick your sales into high gear? We're here to help. Check out our sales coaching and consulting services at predictablerevenue.com. Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Tyler Phillips. He's the principal product manager of AI platform at Apollo. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Regular listeners will know that I've interviewed a few folks at Apollo. We're active users of Apollo. This isn't a sponsored or paid post. I'm an annoying user of Apollo. And anytime I run into a thing where I'm like, hey, I wish Apollo would do this, or I wish it would do that, or are you doing this? I email people. And I emailed Matt, previous guest of the podcast, and he said, you should talk to Tyler, because I was playing around with Clay. People know I've been a big fan of Clay. And I was wondering, are there any features that are going to start showing up inside of Apollo? And so I thought I would use my annoying curiosity and pick the brain of the guy who's in charge of building these things. So Tyler, I'm excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
I'm excited to be here, and I'm ready to receive your feedback as a Apollo PM.
Perfect. Let's start with, tell me what you're building and why.
Sure. Okay, so I'm the principal PM at Apollo, and I'm building our AI platform and the Apollo AI assistant for go-to-market teams. Recently, we launched AI Power-Ups, which is essentially your research assistant that will help you automate your research for any bespoke data point you're looking for, fine-tune your targeting in Apollo, and then build out personalized messages built on top of that with our sequencing tool.
Gotcha. So you're kind of building Clay inside Apollo.
I don't see it that way. I think Clay's definitely done a few things right, especially in the kind of, Clayagent use case, kind of exposing that like a lot of outbound is around creativity and finding the alpha and not just like the traditional filters. So definitely they nailed that. And so it's definitely something we're inspired by. But if we have a lot more of that kind of building that's a little bit separate from a company like Clay.
I love it. I love both tools. I actively use both tools, and I have my loves and hates of both of the tools because I use them quite a bit. And so I'd love to know specifically what's unique about the direction that you're going.
Yeah. So I think like the first thing is for Apollo is, we're still preferred as like the initial list building stage, like even yourself, like, we kind of talked about, you like to filter down your audience on Apollo from like thousands of records, down to a fine-tuned list. So I think like as being like the initial starting point for, you're building out your list, having AI kind of infused into that experience where you can filter, let's say like thousands of records in the Apollo database is like super powerful as a starting point. So kind of an AI first prospecting experience is one. I'd say like the second thing too is like, naturally being kind of all in one tool, you kind of get connected to, all your data is inside of Apollo as well as connected to all Apollo data and like kind of emails and prospecting data. And then finally, like kind of the direction that we've taken, based off our user base, which is skews to them more like SMB, like smaller sales teams, is to make it a lot more easier to use. Like people don't, want to learn how to write really complicated prompts or add a bunch of columns. They just want to get to like the data point they're looking for to then write a personalized message and target off of. So that's kind of what we've been focusing on. And we've seen pretty significant growth with that focus.
I love it. Even when I am using Clay, I always like to start in Apollo anyway. And I know there's lots of people out there that use Clay that say, oh, you're doing it wrong. I've been using Clay since the time when you used to have to go into Sales Nav and do the Clay Google Chrome extension and loop through and just click and click and click. And it was really powerful, but super annoying. I really like being able to start with like the entire universe and then kind of chunk it down and apply filters and see how all the numbers shift. And I find Apollo is a really great place to do that. What I was excited about was being able to run kind of prompts at scale on top of that Apollo data set and like create my own custom filters to like filter it down.
Totally. Yeah. I think we're seeing that like play out too with a lot of like our users are kind of using like the fine-tuned targeting use case. Like they come into Apollo, they try to use, our traditional filters like job filter or job titles, industry, company size. And they're like, okay, you know what? Like, this is not enough. This is still like thousands of records. And like, okay, now I want to like really get down to like a subset of audience. So like has a fit for my product from like basic filters and also like have shown a proven pain point that we can solve. And I think like that's kind of where the market is going in general is like the right person. And I think that's something that Apollo uniquely can win at.
I like it. I think if I'm looking at kind of the differences between the two, I really like Clay because it's infinitely configurable. I can do
Yep.
just about anything. It's sort of like having like console access or like, God
Mhm.
mode in Doom, you know.
Yep.
Was it IDD, GD or something like that was like the code you typed in, you could like walk through walls and get all that. Like Clay
Yep.
kind of feels like that. Whereas the Apollo experience is a little bit more like on rails and a little bit simpler to use.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it's like kind of like the general, like, there's kind of like like if you think about like the user of Paul, like it really like isn't really the user of Clay for the mass audience. Like
Mm.
the user of Clay is like, maybe more of a growth, I guess they have the GTM engineer, but like kind of like the growth hacker. And like Apollo is like more for like your traditional like SDRs, AEs, and like also like, RevOps kind of supporting them. So I think it's just like different like personas and use cases, also segments in the market. And also like the level of comfortability using AI is very different. So I think like with that, you kind of produce like different outcomes, which is why Apollo is moving more in the direction of like, usability, ease of use, and kind of high, high quality from maybe like a more like just mass market use cases, or like maybe Clay is kind of going more like the integration pathway. So it's kind of a divergence in thought. But I do think like the alpha piece of like, finding the right alpha, and like that still exists. And that's something that we still want to support, right? Where you can, you know, find, people that have or companies that have gaps in translation in their website. Like that's something we want to support
Mhm.
for our customers.
I love that. And just if we double click on the finding alpha, because I was talking to Brendan a couple episodes ago when we had a deep conversation into this. So I'll throw a link to that in the show notes.
Sure.
But explain to the audience if they maybe didn't catch that episode. What are you referring to when you're talking about alpha?
Yeah. So I mean, I think like, as you're like thinking through like building out in like an outbound campaign, obviously traditionally you're gonna think through, okay, like what are the different like company size, job titles, maybe even job postings or whatever, the like kind of traditional like targeting methodologies. But I think like today with kind of like the flooding of AI messages, as well as just kind of like the spray and pray model like doesn't work anymore. So there's like this, at least I think Brennan coins it as like micro campaigns. I
Mhm.
mean, micro campaigns is, yeah, I probably won't go too deep in the definition there, but how I think about it is like searching for that alpha using AI where you're looking for a proven pain point that this person has that you can uniquely solve. And I think that's something like you're thinking through, okay, like when someone joins a conversation with me, what is the problem they come to me with? And like, how can I actually ascertain using AI, like breadcrumbs of that problem? And that's something I think that I'm really focused on learning to like how we can build that into our product. And I think with Power Ups, that's like our first foray into this kind of like alpha identification outside of like your traditional filters and also, I guess, intent. Yeah.
Yeah, I think put succinctly, if Apollo adds a filter for B2B SaaS, right,
Yep.
then being able to generate your own B2B SaaS filter in Clay or with one of these tools isn't going to be as powerful anymore because once everybody has access to it, then it's going to be less valuable.
I think that's true, but also, I mean, the counterpoint to that is if you think about like a perfect market, there's no, I guess perfect markets don't exist. I was an economics major. But if you do think about it, like if you have a product that this person actually has a problem and needs to be solved, and then you're able to reach out to them, like that technically, like regardless if anyone else has that information, that will be valuable, right? For you to commit the outreach. So that's like the only counterpoint to that. I do agree with alpha sentiment, but like just because it's available on Apollo, like doesn't mean that it becomes immediately commoditized. But that's my only counter. Yeah.
I strongly agree. And I don't think I don't think things get immediately compromised. I think they kind of follow the technology adoption lifecycle.
Sure.
So the innovators get the greatest value or benefit out of using the filter or the channel or, that feature, that functionality. And then was it early? Sorry, it's late. Innovators, then early adopters, then early majority. Those get like the majority of the benefit. And then once it's making it to the laggards, then it's, you know, fewer benefits. Anyway,
Yeah.
I
Totally.
wanted to dig in on like what's powering the models because I
Sure.
spent pretty much most of Friday playing with a mix of Clay and Apollo kind of together. It was a fun little dance of like it wasn't in prep for this podcast. It just happened to line up that I spent, most of the day. And so I'm curious, like one thing I love about Clay is I've been able to pick a model. I think it's a little bit less important now. Like back when it was like 3.5 or 4, being able to select GPT-4 was incredibly valuable. I probably don't want to scale up an O1 prompt. and have it run. Because one, I'm not doing stuff that needs that level of complexity and reasoning. And two, I don't want to wait the like potentially 30 seconds to a minute on every one of those 1,000 or 10,000 kind of rows in the list. And so I'm curious what's going on behind the models, because I can't see that. And so I was sitting there going like, am I stuck using like a one mini at best, or am I using like three? Like
Sure.
I'd love to understand.
Yeah. So I mean, I will say this, like we're constantly updating the models for the given use case. It's like we just have to migrate to Perplexity's Sonar model. So because we were partnering with Perplexity and Anthropic and OpenAI. But so we have kind of like as of right now, three models or like, the use case models that we have. And then I'll kind of explain like what's layered on top of it. So we have the
Mm,
AI search engine model, which is using Perplexity's Sonar latest model for the research use case. Secondly, we have the AI text generator model, which is OpenAI 4.0 mini. And that's mostly for like categorization use case. So for example, the labeling company, B2B SaaS, we don't really need much more than just like an OpenAI 4.0 mini model. And the
mm,
final one is Anthropic Claude Haiku 3.5, which we've seen to be like fairly cost efficient and also pretty good at generating messaging. It's like well known to the market to be good at like sales copywriting.
mm,
That's all to say though, like what we notice a lot of our users, like we default to the search engine model and almost like 95% of the time, everyone uses the default model. So we've kind of taken a step in the direction of, okay, so when a user, instead of a user like selecting a model, then writing a prompt and like referencing variables, what if you could just write in your own words, like what you're trying to do? And then essentially we will pick the model for you based off your use case and then generate the prompt and like attach the variables in Apollo's database to personalize the prompt. And then we noticed like with that, like it's much easier for people to understand and use. And then if they want to go and tweak it, they can, which is more like the advanced user, which is matches more of Clay. But like that's
mm.
generally what's worked for our user base.
Funny story. I consider myself fairly good at Clay. And when I was working in Apollo on Friday, I found I was using the like explain the prompt and just having Apollo come up with it for me. And I wasn't going in and doing the work of like assembling the prompt myself and picking the
Oh,
variables.
interesting.
Yeah, I was noticing. I think it was because one, the like prompt generator piece did a fairly decent job.
Mm,
The area where I did get stuck is I was assuming that I had access to the full Apollo data model, which would be
mm.
like any of the filters on the left-hand side. So, if I could run and apply one, I would assume that I would be able to reference that information in the model somehow or in my prompt. I get that's a more nerd advanced level feature. Is that something that will be coming eventually, or
Yeah.
is there a workaround right now?
Yeah. So I mean the workaround, so yeah, not every single like data point is supported right now within
Mhm.
the like prompt recommendations tool. But yeah, over time we'll continue to index more of our like, database, like all the different data points we have and even like things like conversations, notes, deals, etc. But yeah, at this current moment, like not all of it's available within the prompt recommendation tool. The reason why the case is because we've been training our models to be able to predict like what variable to use. It just doesn't, it only covers like 80% of the cases.
Mhm.
So for any specific variables, for example, like buyer intent, that's
Mhm.
something that right now we don't cover within the recommendation.
Is that something that I could say? I think the one I was looking at was like, I wanted to filter by the number of people I wanted to filter by have like X number of salespeople. And so I wanted to
Yeah,
apply that filter.
exactly.
And then I wanted to use that data in the prompt.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that data point is not available at this current moment, but we are working to add all the data points to be available to the AI. And I think that's
Why
kind of
not,
like a
Tyler?
broader, what?
Come on, man. Why not?
So
Just give me it.
we're pretty busy to pull a billion end-to-end product.
Yeah.
But I honestly think like just one quick little plug there. Like I do agree though, like the more data you give to the AI, like the better like the output will be. So it's definitely something we're focused on. But yeah, as of right now, it's not available.
For sure. It was one of those like I felt like I could go so far, like kind of carving the turkey. I had like
Yeah.
a very specific knife that was good at like carving kind of the outside. And then when I got into the fine grit stuff, I was like, okay, now I'm gonna export and I'm gonna switch into clay. And like
Interesting.
I made it fairly far, like farther than I was expecting in Apollo, considering I mean, keep in mind, I've been using clay since the early days and I'm like very much a geek at it and I can do most things in there. So
Mm.
I was impressed at how long I stayed in there. And then that was kind of where I ran into the limits of like, okay, I want to be able to do these advanced things and I'm not able to. So I'm hitting that export button.
Yeah. And I think that's also like generally like the trend, right? Of like kind of if you're optimizing more for usability, ease of use, covering those like 99 percentile cases will become a challenge. But I do agree with you, like all the data points out of polish should be available within the prompt.
Cool. I'm curious from what you've seen so far, and I could talk a bit about some of my favorite things, but would have been your favorite things that you've seen used with some of the workflows and the assistant there?
Yeah, sure. So like I guess one example is we partner with this AI translation company called Smartling, and they were using our power ups to basically identify accounts that had a gap in translation on their website. So you look at what are the different websites it's translated into, and then you kind of look through, okay, is there any gap in translation? And I thought that was a pretty powerful use case. Kind of goes back to like the proven pain point or like the alpha that you could really call into, and like the message basically writes the message itself. That's
Mm.
one example. Another example is really interesting is like kind of this like a competitive advantage where you basically use a power up to determine, what is a competitor of of this company doing in like, your service area. So in case for Apollo, it's like lead generation. And you basically like in the email call out that like, hey, if you're targeting a company, like, hey, like your competitor is doing XYZ lead generation, working, let's say, with like whatever, some AISDR company or whatever. And then like, oh, like maybe Apollo would be a good fit for you to kind of compete with them to get ahead. And that kind of creates this like almost feeling of like you're behind. And when you feel behind, you want to kind of claw your way back. And I think that was a pretty interesting use case as well.
Interesting. I want to go back to the Smartling example. So with when they were, if you can't say exactly, if you can't share exactly how, I totally understand, but
Sure.
help me. So they were talking about gaps in translation and there was like
Mhm.
a before and after. So how were they doing that specifically?
Before the power ups.
Sorry, when they were using it, because I thought the gaps in translation was like they had a snapshot of before and after, and they weren't comparing. So,
Yeah. So like basically we pretty much just coded their like manual workflow where we basically look at on the website, they typically have like a toggle in the top right of the different
mhm,
languages. And you basically first extract, and AI is a lot better if you do it in multiple steps. So
mhm,
first you extract, okay, here are all the languages this is translated into. And then you say, okay, like basically for these languages, let's say like, Spanish, is any like language or is any like content on the Spanish web page in English? And then that's kind of how we would identify the gaps. We'd have a list of languages and we just kind of cycle through the website.
and so were they able to do this in the Apollo UI, or was that something that had to be kind of a little custom coded or custom kludged in there?
No, yeah, so we did it all in the Poly UI. The used first step was to like use the AI search engine to identify the languages the website is translated into, and then the
Mhm,
second step is basically just traverse the websites and determine if there's a gap or you notice his English on like the Spanish or Italian or whatever. But
mhm.
giving it kind of like the boundaries of like the languages to look at, giving it the languages to identify. So that was all be able to do inside of Apollo.
So
Just multiple columns.
gotcha. So first column would be go and find the languages supported on this site, kind of
Yep.
look for that website. Second step would be like, okay, and maybe you're outputting the links. Second step would be, okay, find the Spanish page, go and scrape the Spanish page. And then step three would be like, look at the text from the Spanish page, see if there are any English words in there.
Exactly. Yeah. And then if you see there was a gap, it's a fairly easy email to write, right? You're just like, hey, notice that your Spanish web page has like bleed through within English. Our service can help you translate your website content and for like whatever, 30% like the cost of paying an outsourced tool. That
Mhm.
kind of it honestly writes itself when you kind of build out in that way.
Cool. Sweet. I appreciate you sharing. I've got
Yeah.
some, this is the selfish part of the interview where I get to ask you all my favorite questions and
Okay.
things that I would like to, that I think you're going in the direction of. And I suspect other people are kind of struggling with. And so the first thing that I hate doing with Apollo is the CSV dance. I always build a list, download it, upload it into Zero Bounce, upload that into Google Sheets, or output from Zero Bounce into Google Sheets. Then I do the filter of like I grab all the valids and I grab all the catch-alls that are, I think it's category. I can't remember the scoring, but they've got a scoring system out of 10. And so I grab 2 and above at a Zero Bounce. And then I take that and I upload it back into Apollo and I'm like, here's my list.
Yep.
And so I've heard that you're working with zero bounce. Is there something that I'll be able to do to prevent or just save me this CSV dance?
Yes, short answer is yes. So you'll be able to kind of filter on verification status using zero bounce. So that's something that's definitely is rolling out right now. In terms of like more broad, I feel like just to dig a little bit deeper into like the problem that you just shared though, is that like
Mm.
we recognize that like, importing, enriching, and exporting data in Apollo is not the easiest thing to do on the planet.
Mhm.
Arguably, probably one of the harder things, although it shouldn't be. And so I think we're really trying to invest in like Dire, especially to like make it a lot easier to kind of complete these enrichments very quickly, with a combination of additional database providers, not just Apollo, and then also using like the validation source. So inside Apollo, but then if you also want to export, you can do that fairly easily and also add columns. So that will be built out.
Cool. One random observation. I use Apollo, I wouldn't say daily, but multiple times every week. And
Okay.
I have downloaded so many files from Apollo onto my computer.
Yeah.
And every time I'm in settings, I can never find the exports button. I sit there and I look at it like an idiot, especially if I'm showing a client, be like, okay, now I'm going to go download the list. And then I look at it and I always zoom past it. I'm like, I know this is just user error, like problem exists between keyboard and chair, but I wish there was a simpler way of like, I've exported the list, like give me a better way to like track it down. Cause I'm often working with 3 or 4 lists at a time. And I did this on Friday. I was doing something for a client. I had 3 lists and then I downloaded them. I went and had lunch. I came back and I was like, shit, which list did I download first? Which one is list 86? Which one's 87? Which one's 88? And I went, fuck it. I don't want to screw this up. So I went and re-downloaded them and sat and had to wait.
I'm kind of curious if you don't mind me asking, like,
Yeah.
what would your ideal experience be there?
The list gen fairy comes and just like puts them, does all the things for me.
Okay.
But realistically, like I think what I would like is one is if the name of the file was equated to the name of the search. So like even when I'm going and finding like clicking on the exports into the exports piece, I would love to see it came from this search. So instead of like file account export 80, 88, 89, well, 188, that's one. Step 2 would be, when I click download or like when I'm in the screen and I click export, what I like about what Clay released recently is if I just stay on that little modal that pops up, it automatically downloads. Like once the list is ready, and it takes them a little bit to process it, but it's there and then it automatically downloads. So if it did that and it had the name there, then I would feel confident going elsewhere, because right now my process is I build the search in Apollo, then I copy the link, I paste it into a Google Doc as a hyperlink where I name the search criteria. And I do that for the account and for the contact list, so I don't screw anything up. And then I go and I download them and I downloaded this one first, or I click download first, download second, download third, so that I don't mix anything up. Because for me, if I'm sending a list to a client or loading up for a campaign and doing that kind of dance, then I need to make sure that I'm not going to send them the list with the wrong context or upload
Yeah.
the list back into the sequence with the wrong context, right? Because often I'm not just working in Apollo and then downloading and then sending it, right? I'm going to download it. I'm going to go do some other stuff in Clay, and then I'm going to re-upload it. But I'm going to send
Got
it
it.
to the client first for approval. So name it, make it easier, make it auto download with like the name of the search.
Gotcha. All right. Stay tuned.
Awesome. I would love a global. I want Clippy, but for email deliverability.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
I want an annoying little thing at the bottom right that's like, yeah, it looks like you're trying to add some emails to the sequence. Can I zero bounce them for you? So like
Yep.
anytime any of the people on my team add any emails from Apollo into a sequence, I would love to have something that automatically zero bounces them.
Yeah, I think to that comment on that specific point, I think you'll be excited about what we're going to release in a few months related to the idea of Clippy and giving you suggestions and stuff like that. So I don't want to reveal too much, but definitely something in the works related to kind of assisting you as you use the Apollo product.
I don't know what I can say or can't say about some of the beta stuff we're testing, but we've seen some things kind of in that direction, and it's encouraging.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think deliverability overall is definitely another big focus of ours. We recognize that we need to really improve there. And so there's a lot of
Mhm.
investment happening in that front.
Cool. I haven't used it in a while. Remind me, can I still do warming through Apollo?
I believe so. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Is that something that's a focus for you all right now? Or
Yeah.
is that
It
something that,
is. I
okay.
think for that one, I think we're starting to explore a little bit more, like, maybe partnering with different companies in that direction. But
Yeah,
yeah, definitely deliverability is, it's a beast in its own right. So I think in that direction, I think we're definitely looking to, kind of expand out our partnerships there.
cool. One thing as you're progressing that I would love is this is such a I almost feel silly asking for it, but it is like a power user thing that I like in some other platforms.
Okay.
If you're doing zero bounce, or even if you're pinging the mail servers, you understand, like in the response, you'll know if it's Gmail or Office. And
Yep.
I'd love to do like to like. So when I upload my when I add my or sync my email accounts, I'd love to have, 3 Gmails and 3 Outlooks. And then
Yeah.
Apollo would automatically keep Gmail and Gmail and Outlook and Outlook.
Yeah. So you basically want to like just have like domain buying on Apollo for like both Outlook and Gmail to match, right?
I I don't care if I need to buy, like if you could buy them through Apollo, sure, but I just want them to match. Like if I'm sending to an Apollo, or I'm sending through Apollo to a Gmail account, I want that to
Mhm.
go from one of my Gmail accounts.
Yeah.
If I'm sending to
Definitely.
an Office, yeah, so on.
Definitely.
Cool. Can you get? I guess I have to ask on behalf of everybody who's listening. Can you get rid of our cap on the 10,000 enrichments?
Uh, uh, if you're nice to me, I think, yeah, I think for, I think when you're building a great product, it's always nice to break it. So we definitely are going to be moving beyond the cap at some point. But I think for us, we just got to figure out the right like pricing model for that. And that's something that, as we're kind of moving to, more unified credit system, should be good.
Yeah,
But yeah, I totally get it. People want to, break the bank and enrich everything with B2B SaaS or not. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, to me, it's more about the workflow of like I love the best thing about Apollo is for me to be able to start, like you said, start with a huge market and then carve it down. And the most
Mhm.
annoying part of the new features that I was running into was I had to click on. I think I double. I I, I suspect I used a bunch of credits twice because
Okay.
I would run a column and then I started. I think the one I did on Friday, there was like 30,000 accounts in there, and I
Okay.
clicked run, and then I came back 5 minutes later, and I was like, okay, I think I hit run all 10,000 again, and it was just another 10,000. And what I had to do was filter on that column, and then I think it was like is unknown. And then it got me another list of 10,000. And I think I did it a couple of times. Like, I don't necessarily care about processing more than 10,000 at a time. I just don't want to have to come and do this little dance of like click around, click around, click around. So, like, if we're running an enrichment and there's 30,000, I'm fine if you batch it and just let me know like when it runs. I just don't
Mm.
want to. I want to be able to carve up the market, and I don't want to have to do the like a whole bunch of filtering and remembering and coming back and waiting for things to finish.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, especially because, like, if we are saying that we want to be like the initial lead list building, which will have like, much larger like TAM, for example, which is where
Hmm.
people start. I definitely think like filtering down to the SAM could be much more like simpler experience that we could have. I'm just curious though, what were you running on like 40 or 30,000 accounts?
I want to say it was giving, oh, it was, does this company sell to a technical buyer?
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
And so I basically said, hey, here's the description. I think I'd already filtered down like SaaS, like do they sell software? And then
Okay.
like are they B2B? And then do they sell to a technical buyer? I think that was the 3 steps. I can't remember which one it was, but I remember popping into our interview template or doc and I was like, I'm gonna give Tyler shit about this.
I'm sure that won't be the last
No, definitely not.
time.
No, Matt gave me your email address, your personal home address, your parents'
Oh,
address. Like, there's going to be
I'm
letters.
screwed. I'm so screwed.
Is there anywhere I can see where enrichments are running? Like, is there any dashboard that shows like, hey, if I've got 10 sheets that are going, where I could
Mhm.
like check in on the statuses?
Yeah, so in the settings, there's like power ups usage, and you can see
Mhm.
basically all the lists that you run it on. You can click into individual like fields
Uh-huh.
that you created. Yeah,
Gotcha. So I can see how many credits I wasted on a particular enrichment.
exactly.
Okay. Okay. And that's in the settings area.
Yeah, it's under power ups usage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Any advice on running multiple enrichments at a time? Because I find I'd like to do these like stacked enrichments where, like we talked about for in our previous earlier example,
Yeah.
with SmartLink. I'd love to do that, but I find uh, if I'm starting with like 10,000, then I've got to click it. Even if it's just 10,000, I got to click it and then come back and wait and then build the other one. And I can't manipulate the data model easily enough to like, I guess, finish my job. Like in Clay, I can do the first 10, and I know I can do that in Apollo, but I can do, I guess, the first 10 and then do the next 10, and I can pass the data into one prompt and pass the data. I guess is
I see.
yeah. And then I want to run all, and then once I've got that chain figured out, then I want to run them all. And
Yes.
that's where
Got
I
it.
got stuck with Apollo.
Got it. Yeah. So, okay, that makes sense. So, like, generally, like, my recommendation is like, well, before we go into like bulk enrichment, is like start with like the first 25 and then make sure, like, before you like run in like thousands of records, because, once you do that, you're consuming a good amount of credits. Just make
Mhm.
sure that it's like you have a good, like, what I would like to call like a test data set of like different companies, and even like validate each of them, like, check the sources that we display and just make sure that it looks correct and have like a
Mhm.
different thing. And then you obviously can iterate in the prompt to make sure it kind of covers those edge cases.
Yeah.
From there, though, let's say you have like 3 columns, like, let's say like the Smartly example of now, like, list of languages, then you like extract the text, and then from there you have, you want to like basically have a flag for English bleed through between, like, let's say like Spanish, English. So if you run just the third column, it'll actually run all 3 columns because you have dynamic enrichment. So you don't
Mm.
actually need to run on the first 2. It will run, like, let's say you run 10,000 on the third, it will actually try to run on the
All
first
of
2
them.
as well. Although
Okay.
based off your credits, if you run out, it will stop. But that's kind of how that works. That's how we solve that problem right now. But I definitely get the
Yeah.
sentiment that you just kind of want like to run all of that.
Yeah. What I really want was like, I want to run it with 25. And I think where I kept
Yeah.
running into problems was every time I created and ran, I would click like run enrichment. The search view would snap back to saved contacts. And
Mm,
like my first view was all like net new. I always click on like always net new. I never work out of saved
okay.
when I'm doing stuff like this because I want to grab the whole market, not just a small piece.
Yeah.
And so I think what was happening is I'd run the enrichment, it would snap back to saved, and they would only have like 50% or 30% of them that would have run. And then a bunch of them would say, okay, not running. So I'd have to, or like not, hadn't run at all. And so I'd rerun them. So I kind of got into that dance. So is there
Gotcha.
advice on like just save a list of 25 and then work on that? And then once you perfected those 3, then push a bigger list in there?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best. So every time, so every power up, you do save a contact, or I'll say it counts free, but you do have to save the contact to your own database within Apollo. So that does happen. So that's probably why you saw that, like, you went to save and you only saw like 50% of them because it does save in all save. So yeah, I would create like a list, and
I
then I would
see.
run it on that list, and then I would just add more to that list and just keep running on that list. It's a little bit easier to like maintain the state in that format versus like doing it on like net new, because then it will snap to saved, and they will basically over time will add all of them to it, but it takes time to save all those contexts and then run the enrichment.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I follow you there. I'll do that next time. I didn't realize it had to be saved. So that was my screw up there. Or I missed that. Kind of last geeky technical piece here. Um, the I find with Clay, like I've got a templates folder that my team reuses. We have similar templates that I've built and that we
Mhm.
reuse them across clients. What would you say are the best practices for, folks that want to redo that? Like once I've put all this time into say these three columns that do this enrichment, is there a way that I can pull them into like a template or have make it easy for my team to recall that view or that kind of stack?
Yeah. So yeah, basically anyone on your team, if you're an admin, when you create a power up, it creates a custom field, and you can just add that to any view. So you just click on add to view, and then you can click on the field, search the field that you have. So it's kind of similar to like, like a Notion type, or, Notion for like tables. You
Yep.
just add the property
Yep.
that exists. So you can do that in any view, and then
Okay.
that person can rerun it. We also do have the concept of like private fields. So let's say, like, one of your SDRs wants to just kind of create their own power up and
Mhm.
have their own alpha. Those people generally are pretty competitive. They can also create their own and like, it doesn't have to like share across and like kind of muddy the custom field
Yeah.
implementation of your instance. But yeah, that's how it works.
Okay. And then can I set custom views with like these 3 power-ups for this
Yeah.
view and those 4 power-ups for that view?
Yeah. And then basically anyone could go off of that and they can either duplicate the view and they'll always have it.
Gotcha. Okay. So I could do that and then I can run a list through that view if I want to replicate that and do it over again.
For sure. You just filter on the list and then you have it there.
I love it. Okay. I appreciate that. If anybody's curious about any of this and they're listening, they're going, Colin, I wish you had some visuals. Drop me an email. This is my first name at predictablerevenue.com. And I'll do another video follow-up or maybe some companion content with some screenshots or maybe a workflow.
So let us see a demo from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got something coming. I've been testing out a couple of new tools that kind of do walkthroughs and things. So
Okay.
I'm trying to walk the line between I use Clay and Apollo all the time, and I want to be clear that like Apollo isn't paying us for this. There's no like benefit. I'm not even putting a referral link in here because I always forget to put a referral link in places. Maybe this time I'll remember and it'll go in the show notes. So if I did remember, click on that and maybe we get some money. That's not a significant source of revenue for us. I just like to use the access I have through the podcast to learn things from people like Tyler, because most folks, you're like, if 1,000 sales leaders reached out to you, you're not going to be able to, have this conversation with everybody. And so that's what I wanted to use this geeky sales conversation to get into the details so that I could share a little bit more about some of the cool things that we enjoy using with Paula.
Awesome.
I really appreciate you coming on the show. If people want to get in touch, beg you for features, if they're going to be real kind and send you flowers and ask you to, build something for them, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, feel free to reach out to me and connect with me on LinkedIn. It's probably the best. Yeah, it's probably the best to reach there.
Fantastic. And if anybody's looking to get in touch with Apollo, what's the best way? Or to test out Apollo and try out these features, where can they look and find the information?
Yeah, so we have like a automation or AI and automation page that you could probably learn a little bit more and get a walk through the product, and also happy to connect everyone with the sales team. So I can give a link over to you after the call. You could share it out with anyone. Yeah. Feel free to post on LinkedIn too. If you have any cool use cases, I always love to see what people are building.
Sounds great. Tyler, thank you so much for coming on the show. I suspect this won't be our last conversation, but I've certainly enjoyed the first. Thanks again.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Right on. Thanks to everybody for listening and putting up my geeky questions and badgering Tyler over things that probably don't matter too much. And we'll be back to founder stories and product market fit stuff next week. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll catch y'all next week.